when two faux utility workers sent by my notorious HOA knocked on my door. Little did they know they were about to face a furious standoff with my loyal security team. Dawn broke over my little slice of suburban paradise, and I was perched by the window, cradling a steaming cup of coffee like it was a trophy won in a battle against morning grogginess. The first rays of light pierced through the kitchen, casting a warm glow that danced around my cluttered countertops, the remnants of last night's DIY triumph still evident in the scattered tools. Little did I know, however, that my idyllic morning coffee ritual was about to be ignominiously interrupted by a gang of rogue utility repairmen, ostensibly hired by the infamous HOA. Yes, those bumbling gatekeepers of mediocrity, who believe they can monitor every blade of grass. With my comfy jeans and vintage graphic tee on, I felt invincible, until the doorbell rang. It was a sound as unwelcome as a knock-knock joke at a funeral. Heart racing, I glanced through the peephole just in time to see two guys standing there, wielding what appeared to be authentic, but clearly amateurish fake IDs, and a bravado that could only come from being granted a modicum of authority. They boomed with all the subtlety of a marching band under a blanket, demanding to inspect my power lines. Power lines? I barely had enough time to consider how most days I can barely inspect my own life choices before one of them barked, "We're here on HOA orders." Oh, really? I thought, my frustration bubbling up like an impending volcanic eruption. My mind began its revelry in indignation as I pondered how entitled these self-proclaimed power aficionados were. It's absurd. The HOA relinquished their rights to exist the moment they stepped into a myth of grandeur. These guys had the nerve to knock on my door, not wearing superhero capes, but still acting like they had the authority to make me hand over my delicate home electrical system for their inspection. I'd rather invite a family of raccoons to furnish my den than allow these clowns into my utility closet. Just typical HOA absurdity, full of power trippers who decide homeownership means you have zero rights to privacy. And just as I was gathering my thoughts, my internal monologue interrupted itself with an ominous reality. Mike, my stalwart neighbor, a retired military man with the heart of a lion and the instincts of a hawk, was lurking somewhere in my vicinity. I could almost hear the dramatic score swelling in the background as I envisioned him crouched behind a bush, tactical gear blending into nature, my very own woodland guardian. He would be perched like an eagle, blue eyes narrowed, waiting for the moment these faux utility workers would breach my sacred domain. I wouldn't have to say a word. I could merely insinuate a nod and let him handle the comedic chaos that would inevitably ensue. "Inspect my power lines? I'll inspect your incompetence," I muttered under my breath, simmering with frustration as I imagined Mike bursting into the scene, a cape fluttering in the wind, ready to illuminate the lunacy unfolding at my door. But instead of my security team's grand entrance, there was just me, engaging in a silent internal war with a pair of hapless imposters who clearly thought they were the kings of my electrical castle. They continued their incessant knocking, as if their phantom clipboard could somehow transcribe my already laid-out outbursts of disbelief. It was like watching a pair of puppies trying to fetch a stick that was too heavy for them. Hilariously pathetic. Just then, I opened the door, steeling myself to confront these clueless intruders. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but are you aware this is strictly private property? I assume you've got your, official papers in order, right?" I fixed my hazel eyes on their faces, and by the look of panic etched on their expressions, I could tell my casual demeanor exuded an air of authority rivaling Karen Whitaker herself. Were they not informed that I was far too tech-savvy for any shenanigans? I even suspected their IDs may have come from the same craft store that sold urgent birthday cards, their entitlement sticking out like a sore thumb amidst my meticulously maintained facade of homeowner responsibilities. We're just here to do, important things." One of them stammered, adjusting his faded baseball cap, suddenly a loyal servant to his own contradictions. The other shot him a furtive look, and for a brief moment they looked like kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. I could feel a smile creep onto my lips, partially out of amusement, and partially because I was just seconds away from ushering in the absurd part of my life where if it wasn't real, it would definitely be a great scene in a sitcom. My righteous fury was about to be married with some karmic justice, and oh, how I held my breath waiting for it all to unravel. As I stepped aside and invited them into my yard, a strategic move, I assure you, my daring neighbor Mike's beaming smile surfaced behind the bushes as if he were watching a fast-paced thriller, just waiting for the plot twist. "Just ensure you behave yourselves, gentlemen," I warned, my voice dripping with sarcasm that could easily slice through the tension in the air. Somewhere deep down, I knew that if these guys didn't leave with their collective tails between their legs, this entire ruckus would simply become another wild chapter in the HOA saga, where illegal inspections and unwarranted authority meet their comedic demise at the hands of absurdity. And boy, did I plan to document this unfolding drama in my own special way. With a bottle of humor and a dash of audacity in my pocket, I braced for the hilarity that was bound to ensue. I could almost hear Mike chuckling in the background, preparing himself for what promised to be an unforgettable showdown. As I stepped aside, I could practically hear the triumphant score from an action movie swell in the background. With dramatic flair, I gestured for the two faux utility workers to enter my yard, but not without giving them a playful tilt of my head as if saying, "Welcome to the circus, lads." The moment they set foot on my property, the joyous chirps of potential chaos filled the air, mingling delightfully with the scent of upcoming payback. I encouraged their absurdity, puffing my chest out slightly, channeling my inner carpet cleaner like an amateur Gandalf. "Don't worry, gentlemen. Your lack of qualifications won't turn my home into an electrical theme park yet." They shuffled forward, an ensemble of confusion and audacity, stammering about inspections and regulations that honestly seemed as real as Santa Claus managing a hedge fund. "We just need to look at how your power's distributed. For maintenance, you know," one of them stuttered, clearly trying to muster the confidence of someone attempting to sell you a used car on the side of the road. I couldn't help but admire their ability to string together words that meant absolutely nothing while holding tight to the scrappy thread of authority. They had come into this debacle thinking they would make me quake in my jeans. Instead, they were handing me a golden ticket to a stand-up comedy show where the punchline was just around the corner, and the audience was my armed security team, positioned like ninjas in the driveway. Meanwhile, a quick glance out of the corner of my eye caught Mike sliding up behind my obtuse hedge with more stealth than a ninja in dark alleyways. With his usual military precision, he took in the scene, the confused intruders, my extraordinarily calm demeanor, and the rhythm with which I played this absurdity like a violin. It was comically perfect. One could almost hear the thoughts bouncing inside his head. "This is about to get interesting." Just as planned, his sharp blue eyes locked onto mine, and a slight grin crept onto his face. The whole scene felt choreographed like a poorly funded theater production where the actors were unsure of their lines, and the night was overshadowed by the gripping suspense of my coming retaliation. I turned back to the utility duo, hypothesizing ways I could manipulate their vulnerability into my favor. "So do you gentlemen have the proper equipment for this profound inspection?" I gestured to the makeshift toolbox they hadn't really bothered to disguise properly, a sad excuse of a project that even I, the DIY enthusiast, would have deemed unsuitable. "This is your big moment. Go big or go home," I boomed with sarcasm, relishing their growing discomfort, watching as they shuddered under my scrutiny. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself, picturing them lugging along their half-empty toolboxes like wannabe superheroes whose capes had been replaced with discount store aprons. Where was the sparkly sparkle in their authority? I was about to teach them all about the notorious hubris that comes with a clipboard and, more importantly, a complete lack of common sense. "The paperwork. Your charm won't work without it, my dear faux heroes," I pressed, playing it cool as cotton fluff. Their faces twitched with uncertainty, scrambling to recall what goodies they needed to pull out of their hat. Not that I expected anything but dust bunnies and regrets. "I'd hate for our checks and balances to go awry," I added, fluttering my lashes like I actually cared. Each word dripped with the kind of mocking delight that would genuinely make Karen Whitaker proud. Meanwhile, I strategically thumbed my phone, sending a discreet message to my security team. "Het his www. Each keystroke was just expletives of anticipation as the moment approached, the pinch in my gut morphing into a victorious dance of glee. Without further ado, something glorious happened. Before our current comedic act could continue, my reliable security team orchestrated their perfectly timed entrance through the driveway, ranging from the bush to my side, as if choreographed onto the stage of absurdity itself. Dressed impeccably in tactical gear, canines in tow, they stood like sentinels, ready to defend my honor, and I nearly burst out laughing at how utterly the mood changed. "Oh look, gentlemen, my professional team has arrived." I threw back my head in laughter while gesturing towards Mike, whose smug expression mirrored my sentiments. "You may want to approach this humble task of yours with utmost respect now," I warned, running my fingers through my tousled hair, the picture of nonchalance while masking my bubbling delight at the scene unfolding. The faux workers turned pale, their bravado evaporating faster than a snowman in a heat wave. The whole outfit was deflated like a balloon at a kid's birthday party that hadn't quite made it to the cake cutting. Stepping forward in an oddly synchronized manner, my formidable security team eyes locking onto the two wannabe utility workers, I could have sworn I heard a gasp from one of them, the kind only heard in a cheesy horror film. "Sorry, fellas," I interjected, feigning regret while trying my hardest not to break into full-blown laughter. "It doesn't look like you'll be inspecting anything today." I couldn't help but absorb the incident joyfully, ready to make this a neighborhood tale worth glorifying. One that would reach even Karen's eavesdropping ears, probably accompanied by a grimace of utter disbelief. In a race against time and the absurd whims of the HOA, I held my head high, texting Mike with the flair of a Hollywood director signaling for the curtain to fall. "Welcome to the HOA Fun Fair. I hope you've enjoyed your visit. Our refreshments will include sarcasm and the occasional lesson in respecting personal property. Please observe the exit signs toward the nearest door." The absurdity was thick in the air, truly a fitting climax in the ongoing saga of why HOAs need more comic relief. As the duo scuttled away, a laugh rose from deep within me, echoing through the yard like an anthem of triumph for all homeowners standing against entitled madness. I ducked into the driveway for a celebratory fist bump with Mike, now embracing the wild unpredictability of neighborhood living while chuckling at the true champions of this day, my glorious security team. The moment those faux utility workers realized they had stepped into a punchline instead of the punch bowl, I could almost taste the sweet nectar of victory. Their bravado, once towering like a poorly constructed house of cards, came crumbling down faster than a toddler's sandcastle at high tide. As they stammered and backpedaled, my mind whirred with mirth. This was the kind of glorious absurdity I'd only find in a sitcom. A vision of their indignant faces was practically holographic in my mind, an illustration of what happens when you show up uninvited to an authority I had, at least in my own way, meticulously constructed through trial and error. I flashed them my most exaggeratedly sympathetic smile, which I could tell confused them further, like a puppy in a room full of mirrors, adorably disoriented. "Ah, what's wrong, guys?" I called out, leaning casually against my porch rail, as if we weren't embroiled in an epic battle of wills. "Didn't expect to meet my security force? Or did you think you'd perform a little magic act and vanish any trace of accountability?" Spoiler alert. That act might work on Karen, but not on me. I watched as they exchanged perplexed glances, tossed between the confusion of an unexpected entourage and the raw reality of their imminent escape. My delight at their flustered reaction sent a giddy wave of energy through me. It felt like I was an understudy thrust into the lead role of a Broadway show, stealing the spotlight from these hapless stars who had woefully misread the script. The air was almost electric with tension, crackling like static before a lightning strike. My security team stood poised, a magnificent display of tactical grit and loyalty. They wore stern expressions, not menacing but thrillingly protective, like loyal Labradors ready to bark anyone into submission. Mike stepped forward, arms crossed, radiating calm authority that screamed, "You messed with the wrong homeowner." Oh, the satisfaction. I couldn't help it. I let out a barely contained laugh, echoing through the yard and amplifying the delightful absurdity of the situation. It was clear as daylight. If these clowns were hoping to intimidate me into submission, they had picked the wrong house. With an exaggerated hand gesture, I ordered my security team to circle the buffoons. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold, the circus has come to town, complete with trained professionals." True to their role as the ultimate neighborhood watchdogs, my team advanced. They moved as if choreographed. One flanked right, giving an amused look that almost said, "How did you end up here?" And another closed in from the left, further tightening the noose around the faux utility workers' dreams of electrical sabotage. It was like watching a group of well-disciplined lions close in on wandering sheep, with Mike leading the charge like a General Helm sent from the future. I could see the panic creeping into the faux crew's faces as their empty bravado fell flat under the weight of our collective bemusement. Were they really that naive to believe they could tango with a squad prepared for any social faux pas while toting a clipboard? "Here's the deal, boys," Mike said, his calm voice cutting through the absurd tension in the air like a knife. "You'd be wise to head out and forget you ever stepped foot here. I suggest you tell Karen that if she wants to play power games, she should step out of her office and meet us face to face, not send her lackeys to mess with my electricity." Boom. It was like a well-timed punchline in a stand-up routine, and it was magnificent. The words carried authority and assurance, sending the faux crew into a frenzy of movements that resembled tiny ants trying to escape a rainstorm. As they hurriedly retreated, one tripped over his own feet, which I found more amusing than any slapstick comedy could offer. His companion yanked him upright before pointing at my driveway like a confused ostrich trying to find true north. The entire laughable scene was a colorful testament to how humor can dissolve tensions and lift spirits. I turned to Mike, who wore a smirk that radiated positivity, as if he knew he had thwarted an invasion plot worthy of a family movie. "Did we just save the neighborhood's electrical grid from the dastardly clutches of two imposters?" I asked, my voice dropping into a mock-serious tone that almost made me sound like a news anchor announcing the biggest scoop of the year. "Not just the grid, my friend. We saved your sanity and reminded them who's in charge here," he retorted, grinning from ear to ear. Mike had this knack for turning any tense situation into a comical anecdote. I could practically hear the ta-da fanfare swelling in the background, capturing the essence of our impromptu showdown. It was a magnificent reminder that humor could serve as armor against entitlement, a shield to deflect the absurdity of unchecked authority. I felt empowered, basking in both the thrill of victory and the unexpected camaraderie that came from facing down the absurdity of the HOA. As I stood in my driveway, spiking the air with delighted laughter, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was merely the beginning. The HOA might have brought their A-game today, but now I was riled up and ready for battle with my unsuspecting adversaries. After all, if they thought they could waltz into my home and pull a fast one, they were sorely mistaken. Armed with humor, my fearless neighbor Mike, and my trusty security team, I felt bloody invincible, ready to take on any challenge that Karen dared to throw my way. The real homeowners association could begin now, and I was flourishing in the wild tangents of this wacky war for my home and my sanity. The ecstatic thrill of victory was still coursing through me as I watched the faux utility crew stumble down my driveway, their collective pride evaporating quicker than a popsicle in July. I mean, who knew that my home was going to turn into a live free comedy showcase? It was all so delightful. I'd have expected Kevin Hart to pop out from behind a bush to deliver an impromptu stand-up set about entitlement. And the punchline? I could almost hear him quipping in his signature style. "You thought you could mess with Alex Taylor? My dude, this is not just any HOA. This is Fort Knox with Wi-Fi." It was absurd, and I loved every moment of it. As I basked in my triumph, Mike still standing sentinel next to me, I couldn't help but reflect on how wonderfully ludicrous that whole situation had been. Can you imagine someone thrusting their clipboard into another's face, yelling, "We're taking your power away," as if I was living in an old-timey cartoon? It felt like the HOA was suddenly auditioning for America's Dumbest Criminals. If only the neighborhood book club had a chapter on this. Instead of discussing Pride and Prejudice, they'd be laughing about entitlement and electricity. Karen might consider rewriting the HOA rules to include "Don't show up unannounced like a thief in the night" as a new regulation. The adrenaline from that off-the-wall confrontation began to settle, replaced by a warm glow of camaraderie. Mike and I shared a look that said, "We just battled a cartoonish villain together." Alone on my porch, I felt like I'd stumbled into a superhero origin story. "What do you want to do now, oh fearless protector of my electrical outlets?" I asked Mike, my voice dripping with playful mock heroism. He chuckled and shrugged, his impressive biceps flexing slightly as he stretched. "How about a cold drink?" he suggested, grinning like a Cheshire cat that had just devoured a shipment of canaries. As the sun began to dip in the sky, painting the horizon with vibrant oranges and pinks, I sashayed into my kitchen, feeling as though I had just conquered not just idiots in costumes, but a mountain of bureaucracy. The refrigerator whispered sweet nothings, the sound of ice clinking in the glass. I felt fancy, like I could fill my glass with the bougiest concoction known to man just to celebrate. Instead, I settled for an ice-cold lemonade, concocted from a powder that promised to be just add water, but tasted homemade. This was how royalty celebrated their wins, right? With lemonade and a side of sarcasm? Our spirited brainstorming session of what could possibly be Karen's next harebrained scheme to toy with our lives was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a clipboard smacking against a fence. Before I could even grab for my phone to document this impending comedic historical moment on social media, the unwelcome sound of Karen's voice rang out. "What is going on here?" she bellowed, marching up the sidewalk with the fury of a raging bull. I turned to Mike, wide-eyed, suppressing a laugh. Did she not get the memo that her crew had just taken their antics on the road? Little did she know we'd just won the HOA Oscar for Best Performance in an Unintentional Comedy. Karen approached, fiery blonde hair floating around her helmet-like head, as if on a mission to confront the untouchables of her HOA domain. "You two!" she screamed, pointing her manicured finger as if that alone could smite us. "Your shenanigans are an embarrassment to the neighborhood. I choked back a laugh. This lady was living in a sitcom of her own making. What embarrassment, Karen. I just had an epic showdown with a gang of utility imposters. Trust me, these two barely disguised themselves above the level of lawn gnomes, I retorted, my sarcasm dripping off my tongue like delectable honey. You have no idea how to respect authority, she barked. And for a moment, I glimpsed the kernel of desperation behind her eyes. It was like watching a villain grapple with their worst fears. Her authority was slipping faster than a greased watermelon at a summer fair. Oh, sweet vengeance. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, plotting her retaliation like it was an episode of a poorly scripted reality show. How about you pack your bags, Karen? Or have you made another Bermuda Triangle for obnoxious behavior? I offered, throwing in a wink for good measure. She huffed, and if I'd stepped any closer, I might have been singed by the steam coming out of her ears. The day had taken me on a wild ride of humor, camaraderie, and absurdity, but I had a feeling there were more misadventures lurking just around the corner, ready to burst into my life with the enthusiasm of a dog meeting its owner at the door. If you had told me that my post-cocktail hour would include a confrontation with Karen Whitaker, HOA president extraordinaire, I would have laughed aloud and taken my humble glass of lemonade back to my comfortably mundane existence. But there I stood, the hero in my own improvised action flick, facing off against a platinum-haired titan of entitlement, my trusty friend Mike by my side as my sidekick. Sans capes, of course. Karen's approach was heralded by the rhythmic clip of her heels against the pavement, a sound that could only be likened to the final countdown for a doomed contestant on a game show. In her eyes, I could see the fury ignite. My, oh my, but this woman was the perfect storm of bossy and bewildered. Now, any mere mortal would have thought it wise to cower in the face of this force of middle management nature, but I had just pulled off the ultimate power move. I'd thwarted an attempted electricity coup led by her wannabe utility crew. The audacity was almost breathtaking, a combination of bravado that you'd expect from a poorly written soap opera. As she shouted about respect for authority, I couldn't help but chuckle internally. I was practically doing the electric slide in my mind, reliving the pure comedy of it all while she went on about neighborhood standards. Lady, I practically etched no trespassing onto my front dandelions to ward off intruders. Better luck next time. Your ignorance of HOA mandates is appalling. Karen jabbed back, her voice overshadowing the joyful chirping of the evening crickets. Seriously? Did she just pull the mandates card? It was like she was playing Monopoly, and I was stuck in a game of stay at home and live your life. I was half tempted to whip out a PowerPoint presentation on homeowner rights to combat her grave accusations. But then, wouldn't that just be handing her the opportunity to roll her eyes in that uniquely satisfying way that only she could manage? So instead, I held my ground with an exaggerated flourish. Actually, I'm quite familiar with the mandates, thanks to our dear friend Karen, I replied, aiming my finger playfully at her. Mike stifled a laugh, probably imagining if we could grab a bowl of popcorn and settle in for this blockbuster showdown. To add to this delightful farce, I had my security team zooming in and snapping photos of the entire exchange. Useful documentation which could somehow, and I swear I could feel it, become essential evidence in Karen's forthcoming case of HOA overreach. I glanced at Mike, who was quietly setting up his own unlicensed documentary footage from the sidelines. If we had a proper film crew, Karen, we could hire you on for the next reality series, Real Housewives of HOA Hell. The Chronicles of Karen, I shouted, basking in the growing absurdity of the moment. Could you imagine the return of screams and insults for entertainment ratings? She'd undoubtedly wear that tailored suit and clipboard with pride, scolding the camera and conveying how no one respected her authority as she cackled and plotted against people who dared enjoy their own houses. Enough of your games, Karen stomped, now frothing with indignation. It was like watching a soda bottle that had been shaken up too much. The explosion was imminent. Her outburst was a well-rehearsed masterpiece of drama worthy of an Oscar. I will not have you disrespecting our community. Do you think you're the only one with a stake here? Suddenly, the absurdity struck me like a lightning bolt of realization. If this woman took herself any more seriously, she might just float straight to Cloud 9 on that air of entitlement. But honestly, could they see how ludicrous it was, a self-righteous HOA president whining about respect over someone who literally had a security team to thwart off wannabe power wrestlers? Talk about a plot twist. Oh, but I was ready to take this to a new level completely. I raised my hands theatrically, as if attempting to conjure a mythical beast. Karen, if you surrender now, I promise we can negotiate terms of this ridiculous homeowners' war. Mike snorted at the absurdity. We could have signed a peace treaty over lemonade for all I cared. but Karen's return glare could have cut diamonds. It was almost comedic how someone could summon this much rage over something so trivial while clearly missing the mark on chilling out in the social drama department. I genuinely wondered if Karen had ever tried laughing at her own life for a change. What a miracle that would be. Before she could blow her top, my phone buzzed with spirited urgency. It was a neighbor, probably hopping on the trend of capturing this HOA showdown, suggesting we all pitch in for a community garage sale. I quickly typed out, "Hey, maybe we can get some HOA-approved chairs and a box of Karen's shenanigans to sell. All proceeds go to the Keep Alex's Power On Fund." When I shared it with Mike, we doubled over in a fit of laughter, our cheerful rebellion splashing through the atmosphere. Meanwhile, Karen stood there, still trying to reclaim her lost authority, as she sputtered over the nonsense unfolding like a two-bit sitcom plot, flinging her hands in exasperation. The day had turned from mere chores to a full-blown circus, and I had a front-row seat. Our quiet little cul-de-sac had become the stage for a hilarious modern-day comedy of errors, intertwined with heartfelt friendship. It was a reminder, fresh as lemonade, that spinning a ridiculous narrative into something amusing was the true victory here. I reveled in that absurdity. And as Karen glared at us, I felt the deep-seated thrill of empowerment, a simple DIY warrior taking back control. Little did I know what other theatrical chaos the HOA had waiting to unravel right around the corner. It was the most entertaining cliffhanger of all. The sheer absurdity of the situation unfolded with the grandeur of a well-scripted play, and I couldn't help but relish my newfound role as an unsuspecting protagonist. Who would have thought that I, Alex Taylor, a laid-back DIY enthusiast, would find myself in the midst of a drama that could only be described as Karen versus the neighborhood? My heart raced with a mix of exhilaration and incredulity. The evening light painted a rosy hue on the entire block, which now seemed like a stage set for comedic brilliance. As I exchanged glances with Mike, whose snorts of laughter were becoming a symphony in my ears, the once menacing presence of Karen felt more like a welcome comic relief, a character in a sitcom, rather than a genuine threat. "Would you just look at her?" I said to Mike, grinning from ear to ear. "Here I am trying to enjoy a peaceful evening, and all Karen can muster is a full-throttle HOA meltdown over my electricity. Should I have sent a formal invitation to her team of wannabe power trippers? Maybe a polite RSVP would have sufficed." Karen stood there aghast, fists clenched at her sides. It was like watching a furious wind-up toy primed to spring into action only to be yanked back by a comical twist of fate. The expression on her face was priceless, a deadly combination of disbelief, indignation, and the unmistakable sting of defeat washing over her. As she flailed about invoking the phrase, "neighborhood respect," I felt the tide turning in my favor, buoyed by more than just the spirit of rebellion. "You know, Karen," I called out with a hyperbolic flourish, "maybe we could start an HOA just for the dogs. They seem to know how to respect each other a lot better than we do." The idea rolled off my tongue, and laughter bubbled up from Mike, echoing through the block like sweet, sweet music. I could practically visualize the headline, "Chaos erupts as local canines form HOA. Karen appointed honorary chair-dog." The thought sent me into a tailspin of humor. "Don't you dare mock HOA regulations, Alex," she snapped back, but her voice quivered, revealing a crack in her impervious facade. I was struck by the realization that this overdrawn confrontation was a ridiculous matchup. Me, armed with a security team and a sense of humor that could crush mountains, against her, the self-proclaimed queen of power and rules. It truly hit me. I was going for the win, and she hadn't even prepared for the battle. In fact, I was half tempted to applaud her for attempting such an ambitious coup on my electricity. Kudos, Karen. Keep reaching for those high-horse goals. I'm really beginning to think that roadmap of HOA regulations you have is a treasure map, I continued, circling in for the humor-laden kill. I'd be happy to help you decipher whose sarcastic performance actually wins you your neighborhood award. I'm thinking Best Drama Queen could totally be your category. Karen's face contorted, trying to grasp the absurdity of my statements while she failed to maintain her authoritarian grip. Here she was, standing in my yard, and I was going for gold. I could practically hear the audience gasp as I awaited her next miscalculation, ready for my shot at comedic glory. But as I stood there, a newfound confidence thrumming through my veins, an unexpected flash caught my eye. I noticed the security cameras were still rolling, diligently capturing my moment of triumph. I turned to Mike and said, "Looks like they weren't prepared for the all-seeing eye of DIY defense. I think we might just create a sensation with this encounter." Our laughter resonated through the twilight, sending Karen spiraling further into a reactionary frenzy. Her inability to comprehend that perhaps she'd bitten off more than she could chew was becoming clearer by the second. The sheer delight of outsmarting her unwelcome crew transformed the entire fiasco into an unexpectedly epic clash. "Let's be real, Karen," I said, leaning forward to drive my point home like a comedic punchline. "You've got a lot on your plate leading this little I'm the boss's brigade. But here's a thought. How about letting me actually enjoy my house instead of playing HOA locksmith?" My statement rippling in the warm air could have been mistaken for an explosion, the tension in the fabric of our tiny society snapping like an old rubber band. And just like that, I had transformed an uncomplicated evening into a statement of empowerment. For what felt like eons, Karen alternated between the ideals of bare-knuckle authority and full-blown incredulity over my audacity. As the scene reached its dramatic zenith, I couldn't help but savor the moment. The triumph of neighborly camaraderie over tyrannical rules. The juxtaposition of irony that sometimes humor is the greatest weapon we wield knowingly. I leaned on Mike, who nodded solemnly, both of us aware that this was not just a funny incident, but rather a pivotal moment in our little crusade for reclaiming our rights. Just as I was savoring that sweet taste of victory, the chaos flared back to life, foreshadowing further battlefronts with the HOA that were sure to come. My instincts told me that this was just a blip on the exercising of entitlements, and boy was I ready for Act 2. The victorious aura trailing from that confrontation wrapped around me like a celebratory confetti cannon. With the sun sinking below the horizon in a spectacular display of colors, I couldn't resist the urge to reflect, like some sort of philosophical warrior basking in the afterglow of a hard-fought battle. "Do you think I should start carving my name in the HOA Hall of Fame as the HOA Demolisher?" I teased Mike, who was still chuckling, shaking his head as if he couldn't fathom the absurdity of it all. The balance of power had swung back to the residents, an exhilarating thought indeed. Empowerment surged through me like caffeine on a Monday morning, and I relished the idea that I had successfully thwarted an attempt at unwarranted interference. There's nothing like a little dose of reality to put overzealous authority figures in their place, I declared, raising an imaginary glass to toast my triumph. And let's not forget, every good story needs a hero, and apparently, I'm up to play that role today. The notion of my neighbors collectively rallying behind the mantle of underdogs against Karen made my heart swell with civic pride. A neighborhood group chat titled "The Resistance" started forming in my head, complete with dramatic memes of Karen's bewildered face as the main attraction. As I envisioned our future escapades, the reality of absurdity washed over me like a refreshing wave. "All right, folks, let's take a moment to share our most ridiculous HOA experiences," I shouted, wanting to convert my little moment of success into a full-on neighborhood rally. "Remember that time they tried to issue a fine for leaving the garage door open during daylight hours?" Mike guffawed, slapping his knee in agreement. It felt glorious to conjure these hilarious memories. Suddenly, we were not just neighbors surviving the HOA, but a band of merry, mischief-laden warriors armed with shared grievances and bonding humor. "I can just picture the next meeting," I said, practically vibrating with excitement. Karen standing there, trying to regain her composure while we rally behind my finest hour. And the next agenda item is how Alex single-handedly saved our electricity. Everyone would erupt in laughter, and perhaps, just maybe, a little sliver of respect for my DIY prowess would shine through her tightly controlled demeanor. The thought of her fuming while we relished the absurdity of the entire HOA landscape made my heart race. Could we actually shift the balance of this mundane war? As the twilight deepened and darkness settled upon our neighborhood, I cast a sidelong glance at Karen, still muttering and plotting next steps in her self-appointed kingdom. My fingers twitched with the urge to whip out my phone and capture this moment in HOA history on video. What better way to immortalize the day than by recording the indignant queen trying to reclaim her throne from the sassy DIY hero? I envisioned the viral status of "Who cut the lights?" sweeping across social media as neighbors joined in to share their own tales of HOA hijinks, creating an unstoppable wave of shared activism laced with humor. "You know, Mike," I said, mirroring his seriousness for dramatic flair, "next time Karen shows up demanding my electricity respect, I'll just respond with a casual, 'Sorry, I'm busy annexing my front yard for puppy paradise. But do let me know if we need an HOA for neighborhood puppies.'" I could barely keep my composure as he roared with laughter at my playful suggestion. The absurdity of it all tucked its little claws into my sense of empowerment, a perfect tangent of humor to the saga that continued in our community. Every laugh was a reminder. Together we could refuse to bow down to the whims of entitlement cloaked in authority. As the night deepened, I felt invigorated by the camaraderie that our little showdown had sparked. Being able to roast the most powerful woman on the block while protected by Mike, my trusted sentinel, made the evening one to remember. "Let's face it," I said, my voice gaining a boldness that could only be attributed to the thrill of rebellion. "We're not just gardening hobbyists and lawn decorators. We're revolutionaries. Think of all our neighbors worried about HOA fines, snarling through their curtains, living their lives like they're in a mundane reality show. Together, we could change the script." Ultimately, my outrageous endeavor had not only anchored my stand. No HOA faux utility crew could dictate my power, but also rallied a community ready to face crazy rules with laughter.